Hello, I'm Kevin Morrison, the president of Commercial Transportation Safety Associates, or CTSA. And today's virtual safety meeting, we're going to talk about the hours of service and the ELD rules. So what I'm going to do is just kind of explain the hours of service and the rules, the requirements for ELDs, and try to clear up some misunderstandings, some confusion about it for drivers and for carriers, so everybody's on the same page as far as what's required for the hours of service, for the logs, and the ELDs. So I usually start by giving a little background on myself for any new viewers who don't know who I am. Again, Kevin Morrison. I'm a former USDOT safety investigator, roadside inspector, and program manager. I spent 21 years with the DOT. Most of that with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which is the agency responsible for regulating the commercial transportation industry. Last 10 years of my career, I was the state programs manager in South Carolina. Basically, I had oversight in my state over the CDL program, the roadside inspection program, and the new entrant program, which were administered by the state. So again, today we're going to start with hours of service, rules, regulation pertaining to logs, and I'm just going to follow along with my PowerPoint that I developed earlier this year, and just try and clear up any questions that you may have. So let's start with the hours of service requirements. And basically, as a truck driver, you have to comply with the 11-hour rule, the 14-hour rule, the sleeper berth provision, the 100 air mile radius, which there's been a change to that, which I'm going to talk about, 16-hour exception, which is another change, and we'll just kind of go through what's required now since the change that occurred in September of this year. So 11-hour rule, pretty straightforward. Basically, you cannot drive your truck more than 11 hours without taking a 10-hour break. That's pretty self-explanatory. At the same time, you have the 14-hour rule, which says that you cannot be on duty more than 14 hours without taking a 10-hour break before you drive. So you could drive 11 hours and you can be on duty for 14 hours, but after being on duty for 14 hours, you can't drive anymore until you've had that 11-hour break. I'm sorry, 10-hour break. Sleeper berth provision. Basically, you can use a sleeper berth to help out getting your break. You know, in addition to off-duty time, you can use time in the sleeper berth to get your 10 hours of rest that's required by the regulation. So, but you can't, you know, if you use the sleeper berth, there's rules that go along with that. And we're going to talk about what those rules are. The 60-70-hour rule, basically, if your company operates trucks 7 days a week, then you're going to be on the 70-hour rule. And the 70-hour rule says you can't drive more than 70 hours in an 8-day period. If your company operates trucks in, less than 7 days a week, now you're on the 60-hour rule, and you can't operate your truck more than 60 hours in a 7-day period. So whether you go by the 60 or 70-hour rule depends on how many days a week your company operates. But you should be, just like your ELD is calculating, or on your logs, you're calculating, the 14-hour rule. You're trying not to violate the 14-hour rule. You also have to keep in mind that your hours are going against the 60 or the 70-hour rule as well, depending on the period that you have to abide by. You have a 34-hour restart. So if let's say you're on the 70-hour rule, then you can restart any period of 34 hours off duty will restart that 60 or 70-hour clock. So that's called your 34-hour restart. Another thing you must do is take a 30-minute break out after 8 hours of driving. There's been a change to that, which we're going to talk about too. Up until September of this year, the 30-minute break had to be taken as off-duty time. And there's been some changes to that that we'll get into later as well. But you have to take a 30-minute break after driving your truck for 8 hours. And again, your ELD should be capturing that, and you just have to abide by the ELD when it tells you that it's time for your 30-minute break. Let's talk about on-duty time. What's considered on duty? Anytime you spend with your truck, or you'll have responsibilities for the company or for the truck that you're driving, must be logged as on duty. So getting fuel, fueling up, taking it to the truck wash, taking it to the mechanic to get it worked on. Anytime you have responsibilities for your company and it involves using that truck, it must be logged as on duty. So, for example, if you're off duty on a Saturday, you decide to take the truck to the car wash, or to the truck wash, or you decide to fuel up that truck on a Saturday when you're off, that can't be off duty. That has to be logged as on duty in order to be legal. So a lot of drivers think, I'm off duty on a Saturday, I'm gonna run and take my truck to get it cleaned up, or run to get it fueled for my trip on tomorrow, and they'll keep that off duty. It'll still show up as off duty on their logs, and then when the DOT looks at that and they see a receipt where you got this truck fueled up on Saturday, they want to see that was logged as on duty. That gets a lot of drivers a violation, gets a lot of companies a violation, things like that. So just remember, anything you do with that truck, if it's going to be to the benefit of the company, a clean truck is to the benefit of the company. So if you get that truck washed, again, that's benefiting the company. That must be logged as on duty. Let's talk about the 100 air mile radius, and there's been a change to that also. Up until September of this year, it was the 100 air mile radius, where as long as you operate your truck within 100 air miles of the location that you work, as long as you left that location and came back to that location at the end of the workday, as long as you didn't work more than 12 hours, and as long as the company logged your activity with a time record and kept it in the company, you didn't have to keep logs. But there's been some changes to the 100 air mile radius as well, and again, we're going to touch on that during this presentation. So let's talk about what must the log include. Basically, every blank on the log must be filled out. So in addition to the date, the mileage, the graph that shows what you're doing, you have to have the bill of lading, you have to sign or certify the logs, anything that's missing on the log, any blanks on the log, is going to be a violation on the roadside, or if the DOT comes into your company, that's going to be a violation for every log that's missing any bit of information. That's called a form and manner violation. So you want to make sure you definitely fill out your logs completely, and you want to certify your logs or sign them electronically, and do that at the end of your shift, or in the required time. The regulations say you have 13 days to sign a log and turn it into your company. With the ELD, it's a lot easier now just to certify your logs, a lot quicker. But you definitely you don't want to turn in logs, or don't want the DOT or your company to go back and look at your log and see where you didn't sign or certify it, or see any blanks missing on the logs. So those are pretty much the rules that every driver has to comply with. So let's talk about electronic logging devices, ELDs. So the logs, or the hours of service regulations, have been the same since the mid-1930s. I've seen DOT audits from the 40s and the 50s in my old office, and a lot of the codes, or the violation codes, were still the same back in the 40s and 50s, and they actually, as I said, goes back to the 30s. There wasn't any real changes to the DOT hours of service regulations from the mid-30s all the way up until the early 2000s. That was the first significant change, and then there's been a few minor changes since then. So the DOT log requirements haven't changed, but in 2017, the way you have to log your hours of service has changed, and that came with electronic logging devices, or ELDs. So as of 2017, anybody who operates a commercial motor vehicle over or newer than 2,000, more than 8 days in a month, you must have a electronic logging device installed on your vehicle, and that's just the way it is. You have to have it unless you meet one of those exceptions. So ELD requirements, you have to have an ELD that's registered with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration website, or on their website. You can go to FMCSA's website and see a list of all the registered ELDs. If you're using an ELD that's not on that site, then you're in violation. Again, you must sign the logs and submit it to, electronically sign them on the ELD, and submit them to your company within 13 days. Your employer should review the logs. They're required to review your logs and make sure that you're not violating any of those out of service requirements that we talked about. The employers must keep the logs for 60 days on a device or a server or something other than the ELD unit in the truck. So they're still required to keep the logs for 60 days. They also must keep the supporting documents. The regulations require that a carrier have supporting documents that can be used to compare to driver's logs. And that's another thing I'm going to touch on that I didn't touch on as far when we were talking about the different requirements, and that's false logs. That's a big issue. The DOT checks for it, and your employer should be checking for it. Basically, your logs have to show what you're doing. It has to show exactly what you're doing. Your log can't show one thing and you're doing something else. They can't show that you're in one city and you're actually in another city. Your logs can't show that you're off duty and you're actually on duty. Your logs can't show that you were off on a Saturday and you ran down the street to fuel the truck, as I mentioned earlier. All of those are considered false logs in DOT regulations, and to check for false logs, it's very simple, really. They just compare your documents. The DOT and your employer just compare your fuel receipts and your bill of ladings to what your log shows, and that's how your employer and the DOT can easily determine false logs. If you turn your ELD off, if you unplug it, turn it off, or interfere with that ELD anyway, that's easily detectable by the DOT. They can run a report from your ELD manufacturer that tells anytime your ELD was unplugged or turned off when it should have been on, and that kind of thing. So that's easily determined by the DOT if you're trying to operate with and not using your ELD, and it's considered a false log. It'll be a violation at the weigh station, and it'll be a violation against your company. So you definitely want to have the ELD plugged in and using it anytime you're operating the truck. So as far as other requirements for the ELD, let's say you go through the weigh station and you get a violation, or you don't get any violations for 11-hour rule, 14-hour rule, false logs, 30-minute breaks, or anything else. Now the DOT is going to check for a few other things that could still be a violation, hours of service violation against you and the company. And that's, again, you have to have the ELD. It must be mounted in a fixed position. You can't have your ELD on a cell phone that's laying on the seat or on the dashboard. The regulations say the ELD must be mounted in a fixed position that can be viewed when the driver is seated in the driving position. So that's one thing they're going to check for. They're also going to check to see if you have an operator's manual for the ELD. You must have a user's manual for the ELD in the truck at all times. You must have written instructions for how to transfer the data on the ELD to a roadside inspector's computer. There must be written instructions for that in the truck at all times, and that could be included in the operator's manual or the user's manual, but you have to make sure that you have those instructions. You also have to have written instructions from the company on what to do if the ELD malfunctions, and that could simply be, that could be as simple as, notify the company and or the ELD manufacturer and start using your paper logs. But it has to be written what the driver is required to do if the ELD malfunctions. The DOT roadside inspectors will check for that requirement, and they'll violate you if you don't have written instructions for that. And the final thing, you must have 8 days worth of paper logs at all times in the truck. 8 days worth of blank paper logs. And if you, what those are for is if the ELD does malfunction and you notify your company, you notify the manufacturer, now you start using your paper logs, and you can use them for up to 8 days while the ELD unit is being repaired. But you must have that 8 days worth of blank paper logs in the truck at all times. The roadside inspectors will check for that. If you don't have it, that'll be a violation against you and the company. So let's talk about these violations that you get on the roadside for hours of service. Just real quickly, any roadside violation you get when you go through the weigh station or inspection station, they each have what's called a value, that tells how severe. It's a severity level basically. For each violation. They each have their own severity level from 1 to 10, and I just call them points. It's just easy to say each violation has a point that's applied against the company's safety record, a point of 1 to 10. So if you have a driver's license issue, a medical card expired, any maintenance discrepancy on the truck that's written up, any hours of service regulation that's being violated, when they write that violation, there's a point associated with that that's going to be applied to your company that you work for. And a lot of drivers feel like, I'm an owner operator, I don't have to show anything to my company, I don't have to do what the company says when it comes to my logs or whatever. But if you're operating under someone else's operating authority, if you don't have your own operator authority, you may be an owner operator, but if you're leased on to somebody, you're operating under their operating authority. So the DOT holds them responsible for everything that you do. So if you're getting hours of service violations on the roadside or any violation on roadside inspections, those are being applied against your company. And once the DOT is reviewing this on a regular basis, and once a company gets so many points against them from roadside inspections, now the DOT is going to schedule the company for a compliance investigation. A lot of people incorrectly call it an audit, but it's a lot more intense than an audit. They're going to come in and they're going to look at everything that the company's doing, the paperwork, processes, policies they have in place, and they're going to make an evaluation on the company about how safe the company is operating. If they find a lot of violations, it's going to affect the company's safety rating. A company can get a satisfactory, conditional, or unsatisfactory safety rating based on a compliance investigation. And if they get a conditional or an unsatisfactory safety rating, that's going to cause problems for the company in getting loads from brokers. If they get an unsatisfactory safety rating, the company will be shut down unless they can show the DOT that they've turned things around in a certain amount, in a certain period. So, again, also the company can get a fine based on the compliance investigation. They can get a fine that's going to take away from the company's bottom line. So, the safety investigation, safety rating, the fines that they can get. All of that depends on the roadside inspections that the drivers driving under that company's operating authority is building up. So again, you want to keep that in mind, that any roadside inspection violation is going to affect the company. Another thing, another bad effect that has is the company, the insurance rates will go up. Insurance companies look at a company's safety record, they look at drivers' violations at the weigh station, that kind of thing, and that determines the insurance rate that a company has to pay. And of course, if they got a lot of bad violations, then the company is going to have to pay higher insurance rates if the insurance company don't cancel them altogether. So again, all of that depends on the actions of the driver, on the road, including compliance with the hours of service violations. One quick thing also for drivers to keep in mind is that not only is the company being evaluated based on your roadside inspections, but you as a driver is also being evaluated. The DOT a few years ago established a system called the Pre-Employment Screening Program, or the PSP system. This is a system that evaluates you as a driver. So any company that you go to work for, they can log in and run your name in the PSP system, and they can see every roadside inspection that you've had anywhere in the country over the last 3 years. So if they log into that system and they see that you have a lot of hours of service violations, if you have violations of your license being expired or your medical card being expired, they can see that you've caused a lot of points to go against other companies that you work for. So now they have to make a determination whether they want to hire you or not. But just keep in mind that you as a driver are also being evaluated by your roadside inspections, and that it can affect your career at some point down the road. So the last couple of things I want to talk about is personal conveyance and the new or the changes. Just review the changes to the hours of service rules. So when it comes to personal conveyance, that's often a source of confusion, and to be quite honest, it's abused a lot, and drivers think that they're they think they can use it to extend their workday. But what happens is the DOT can easily determine when somebody is abusing personal conveyance and using it to basically extend the 14-hour day. Bottom line, personal conveyance have always been in the regulations. During the 20-plus years that I was with the DOT, I probably saw drivers use personal conveyance in the logs that I looked at maybe 3 or 4 times. Definitely under 10 times where I saw drivers use personal conveyance. But when ELDs came into the picture, suddenly drivers are using personal conveyance 2 or 3 times a day, several times a week, or they're just using it anytime they want to try to extend their workday. Again, the DOT can easily determine when you're abusing the personal conveyance allowance. Personal conveyance should be used only when the truck is being used for personal reasons. For example, if you've got the truck and if you had your car, this is the best way to look at it. I'm working using the truck, out on the road or whatever. If I needed to do something for a personal reason, if I had my car, I would use my car. But since I don't have my car, I have to use the truck. Now you can use personal conveyance. For example, if you're at a hotel for the night and you want to run to get something to eat, you want to run and catch a movie whenever we're able to go to the movies again, you want to use the truck to go and run an errand like that when you're off duty, you can log that as personal conveyance. Even if the truck is laden, you can use it for personal conveyance for personal reasons. You can use it to get home if you're driving between the terminal and your house. As long as that time is not so far that it's affecting your ability to get the proper rest when you come back on duty. So just keep in mind that that's what personal conveyance is used for. You can't suddenly, you're running out of hours on your log, so you switch to personal conveyance and still run the load. You can't use personal conveyance to set yourself up and get closer to the location where you got to pick up a load tomorrow. You know, there's DOT can easily detect that. And what that is it's logged as a false log. They determine that you're using personal conveyance to extend your workday, or add hours to the amount of time you can drive or anything like that. If they're determined that you're using personal conveyance to help you in your duties with the company, then they're gonna cite that as false logs, and that's gonna that's gonna go against you as a driver, and it's gonna go against you as a company, or go against your company. So employers have the option of turning personal conveyance off. If drivers are abusing personal conveyance, employers can turn that off, and that way it will keep them out of trouble with the DOT, because drivers are abusing personal conveyance. So you want to keep that in mind. Personal conveyance is not something that you can use just because you're out of hours, and you want to extend your workday. The DOT, they pick that up very easily, and they cite it as a false log every day out here. So just keep that in mind. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the changes to the hours of service that occurred on September 29th of 2020. And basically there were only 4 changes that occurred that you need to be concerned about. But there was only 4 changes to the hours of service. As I mentioned, hours of service have been the same since the mid-30s, with few exceptions. And then on September 29th was one of the exceptions where they made changes to the hours of service. The 4 areas where the changes were made were in the short haul exception, the adverse driving conditions exception, the 30-minute break requirement, and the sleeper berth provision. Those are the only changes that were made to the hours of service in September of this year. Short haul exception, as I said, you don't have to keep logs if you go within 100 miles of your work location and back within 12 hours, and the company keeps a time record to show that. Well, they changed that from 12 hours that you can be on duty to 14 hours, and they changed the 100 air miles to 150 air miles. So now you can work up to 14 hours. You can go 150 miles away from your work location and back in that 14 hours. And if you do that, and you get 10 hours off before you have to be at work the next day, you don't have to keep logs you don't have to keep logs or operate at ELD. But the company does have to keep a time record, and there's requirements for that time record that they have to follow in order to do that. But that was the change made to the short haul exception. They extended the work day from 12 to 14 hours, and they extended the mileage from 100 air miles to 150 air miles that the driver can go away from his work location. The next change was to adverse driving conditions. They made an exception to that. So basically, the adverse driving conditions exception it's been in the regulations for a long time, where if you come up into a situation with adverse driving, like an accident, like weather conditions or things like that, then you could, in the past, you could extend your day extend your driving time up to 2 hours. So instead of 11 hours, if you run up on a bad accident or bad weather, you could drive 13 hours. Well, now all they did now, or the change that they made in September, is they've extended the workday for that as well. So they extended the 14-hour workday to 16 hours for adverse weather. So in addition to the driving that had already been extended under that exception, they've extended the workday as well. The third change is to the 30-minute break requirement. As I said earlier in the presentation, you have to take a 30-minute break after driving for 8 hours. It has to be on your log. In the past, up until September, that 30-minute break had to be off duty. Now, what they've changed that where you can take that 30-minute break while you're on duty, and not driving. So basically you can take that 30-minute break while you're getting a roadside inspection. You can take that 30-minute break while you're fueling up. That was the change made to the 30-minute break requirement. And then the last thing is the sleeper berth provision. Again, with the sleeper berth, you can use that to get your required 10 hours rest. You can go, 10 straight hours in the sleeper berth. You can do a split sleeper berth, or you can combine the sleeper berth with off-duty time to get your 10 hours. Well, the change was made to the split sleeper berth. If you used the split sleeper berth to get your 10 hours before, you had to take a period of 2 and 8 hours in the sleeper berth, a period of 2 hours and then a period of 8 hours to get your 10 hours. Well, now they've just changed that where you can get, you can do 7 and 3, you can do 7.5 and 2.5 and that kind of thing. So they've basically given you more flexibility using the sleeper berth, where you don't have to take it in 8 and 2 hour periods for that sleeper berth split. So those are the changes. Only 4 changes, as I stated, to the hours of service. ELDs. If you have a registered ELD, a ELD that's been registered with the FMCSA, they should know about these changes. They should have reprogrammed the ELD to capture these changes. You might want to verify that, but it should be programmed into your ELD. And as a driver, you just have to do, just follow what your ELD is telling you to do. If you do that, you'll be fine as a driver, and the company will be fine without, you won't have to worry about a lot of hours of service violations that's going to affect, it's going to bring in the DOT, it's going to affect your insurance rate, the company's insurance rates, and it's going to affect your brokers wanting to work with you. So, again, that's the update that I wanted to give. If you have any questions, please contact your company, who can contact me. I don't care if you contact me directly, through email that's on the screen, and I will definitely help you out and answer any questions that you have. So other than that, look forward to coming back with another virtual safety meeting in the future. And in the meantime, also check me out on social media. I appreciate any likes, clicks, register, whatever, on social media on the stuff that I have out there. But in the meantime, just stay healthy and stay safe. Thanks.